Hi everyone, so welcome to the 9th Molecules Unlimited online meeting. Our theme tonight is sight and vision, and we've got a wonderful array of readers, not least our guest reader, Vanessa Lampert, who I'll introduce shortly, and many other wonderful readers as well. I think we'll just go through in one block, if that's okay tonight. And we are recording the session for all our YouTube followers and the wider group. And then maybe at the end, we can just have an open discussion if anyone's got anything on their mind about what we've heard tonight. So I'll introduce Vanessa. So Vanessa Lampert's collection, Say It With Me, was published by Seren in 2023. She's widely published, most recently in the Forward Prizes anthology, the Day Telegraph, Poetry London, the London Magazine, and Oxford Poetry. During the pandemic, she taught poetry to school children in India via Zoom. She's won many international prizes, and she works as an acupuncturist, an editor, and a teacher in Wallingford, near Oxford, and she volunteers at the Oxford Poetry Library. So thrilled you can join us, Vanessa, and over to you.
Thank you very much, and thrilled that you asked me. It's lovely to be here. And it's been so nice to think about, I'm so far away from being a scientist, so it's really lovely when you have a challenge to think about something in a different way. And I've been thinking about the eye and vision and how, as poets, one of our challenges is to try to kind of see things in a different way and to see things maybe a bit more like when we first saw them as children, to kind of go back to a time when we didn't have such a kind of old knowledge of everything, so that we said everything in the same way. We kind of reduced everything to the same way that we say it. And so a good poem, I always think, says something in a new way, which means that you have to see something in a new way. And so I chose the poems that I'm going to read with that in mind. The first poem I'd like to read is written about the child who was once me a long time ago. And it came from my children both had imaginary friends, and I found it really fascinating to kind of watch how fully they believed in them and imaginary friends. And I used to ask them questions about, like, my son had a friend called Woody with a woolly hat. And my daughter had a friend called Cheerio, who was named after the cereal that I wouldn't let her have. And I would say something like, "Oh, what's Woody with a woolly hat? Like, what color are his socks today?" And my son would go, "Yellow," like straight away. He had a really clear vision of this thing that no one else could see. And he'd suddenly go, "Oh, Woody's just hit me," and just he was fully engaged in the world of this imaginary being, and I found that fascinating. And one day I asked my dad, "Did I ever have an imaginary friend?" And he said, "No, you had an imaginary machine." And so I asked him a bit about that, and I still don't know what that imaginary machine was. I just know the things that my dad told me that I said about it when I was a child. And this poem is about that imaginary machine, and it's called Sloking Horde. If you want to know if I ever had an imaginary friend, no. I had an imaginary machine called a Sloking Horde that had red wheels and went on water. And if you want to know if my Sloking Horde was safe, then yes, small children have little time for jeopardy. And if you want to know who took care of me, well, people did. I kept them within sight and took them out on the river on my Sloking Horde. I held on to an imaginary ribbon to haul my Sloking Horde through the streets of St. Albans in 1966. And if you want to know if anyone teased me or laughed at me or my Sloking Horde, then no, No one ever did. And that leads me to, led me to think about, like, what must it be like for a child when you see something for the first time and the whole world is kind of new. I guess when you first are born, you can't see brilliantly, but then everything starts to kind of become clear. And when you're grown up, you don't see so many things for the first time. But when you do, it's still a wonderful sort of, you have that kind of childlike awe. And I had that experience a couple of summers ago when I saw a creature that I'd never seen before. And because this is, Oxford, live in Oxfordshire, I was just looking at this creature and a man walked past and I just stopped him and sort of pointed to it and said, "Do you know what this is?" And of course he was like a university professor of such things and knew all about it. He was able to tell me all these things about it. So that was really lovely. And this is the poem that I wrote about that encounter, and it's called Hummingbird Hawk Moth. September and rebellious summer rose late and alarmingly hot. I was weary, headed home, when some small strangeness tugged at my attention. Airborne over the courtyard it was, an alien of softness and thrum. A velvet remnant, an orange purse bursting with nectar, its wings a haze, its horn a gold-tipped blue. It seemed more bird than any moth I knew. Something about its wildness, the hum of its life and hurry, made me miss you. It hovered above the mania of pink valerian in bloom. When it flew away, I cycled home, curious to learn its habits and its name. Hummingbird hawk moth, tiny messenger, blown across the sea on a warning wind. Poor creature, wouldn't survive a northern winter. Aren't we tender with so little time? And I very rarely write anything which comes from my work as an acupuncturist because everything that people say to you is confidential. But I once had this I was doing an MA and I was trying really hard to just had to produce loads of poems. You have to make a poem out of absolutely everything that happens to you in order to have enough of them. And so I asked permission from the person who told me the story to write this poem, and he was telling me that his daughter rescued hens from factory farms. And he said that you put the rescued hens, and they're all kind of like wretchedly sort of, featherless and skinny and half dead. And you have to put them in with the hens that you already have in the middle of the night. And the hens kind of like aren't very kind of bright. So when they wake up in the morning, they don't remember that the other new hens weren't ever there. And he said this thing, which was, they completely recover and they grow all their feathers back and they kind of just behave like ordinary hens, except if it rains, they don't understand the rain. He said because they're stupid and they just kind of like stand there in the rain. And so I thought, well, I want to kind of like give those hens a new kind of, I like a new story about why they don't run in when it rains like all the other hens. So I wrote this poem and it's called Song of the Rescued Hen. And once I was the egg laid for my deliverance, and to peck was the shape of my devotion dance. And I stepped from my broken cradle into bright, and they took me to the place of proximity and light, and I laid and was wretched, and I laid and I wrenched all the feathers from my breastbone in that cage. and all horror was my sorrow. And I laid, and was derelict and broken, blinded framework of dismay. And I laid till it was over, and they took me to the dust, and I scratched beneath the sky that gives me darkness, and I roost, and the rain is my solace, falling silent through the wind, and its crystals soft and precious as they break across my wings. And I stand beneath its balm, to be healed, to be strong, and this will be my freedom, and I shall be its song. This poem is about it's kind of like more literal about a kind of story from my childhood. My parents were divorced, and actually I'll let this poem speak for itself, but sometimes you have to be able to see the whole story of a thing to understand it. You know, your eyes are dependent upon you being able to see all the kind of sequences. Like if you're watching something on Netflix and there's a series and you miss one, like I'm always falling asleep, and then I have to wind it back because otherwise I don't know what's going on. And when I was a child, there used to be Saturday morning cinema, and it was quite short. And because my parents were divorced, we only ever saw every other kind of episode of the things that were on at the cinema. So I quite like to balance the kind of sadness that people turn to poetry to kind of be able to be okay with, to heal from, or to write about. And I quite like to kind of balance that, hopefully, with being able sometimes to also see the funny side in things. And this poem is called Contact Arrangements, 1972. To the tune of alternate weekends, we danced back and forth between our parents and their upgraded spouses. In one house, we ate instant mash. In the other, Mum peeled the King Edwards she'd grown herself. One Saturday, Dad took us up to London to the Tutankhamun exhibition. On seeing the queue, he said, "Christ Almighty," and brought us home. On Mum weekends, we went to the new Coronet in Didcot to watch the story of Flash Gordon, saviour of the universe, unfold. Each episode began with a resolution of a cliffhanger we'd been at Dad's for and hadn't seen, then segued into another, the resolution of which we'd be at Dad's for and wouldn't see. And this is my last poem, and it's about my sister. It's about my sister. On the very, very first day of lockdown, my sister took her dog for a walk in Florence Park in Oxford, and the dog was kind of sniffing around a stream where it always kind of sniffs around, and it suddenly wasn't there anymore. And my sister went down into the stream and she noticed there was a kind of tunnel, or opening of a tunnel, and realized that the dog had gone into the tunnel but wasn't able to come backwards. So it just had gone down this tunnel to who knows where. And everybody had just been told to go home. And, that was the first day of lockdown. And so the dog didn't know where it was going. It couldn't see. And my sister, it got dark and my sister couldn't see. And then, she just went home and lay awake all night waiting for it to be light again. And this was in March. So it was quite late, and then went back and kind of resumed the search for her dog. But it's also about God, who we can't see, and some of us believe, there's a God, or there's something which is more than us, that maybe we don't call God, but more powerful than us. And this poem came from a prompt on an ekphrastic course that I was doing, where I kind of like crashed two things together, because I was reading a book about Craigie Aitchison, the Scottish painter, Thank you so much for listening to me, and it's really lovely to be here. This poem is called Bedlington Terriers. Today's a wet epic of cloud, so I'm reading about the artist Craigie Aitchison in a book I was given last Easter. He said the crucifixion was the most horrific story ever told, and painted it repeatedly. Here is a painting of an orange field bellowing at a wall of unwavering magenta where sky ought to be, and a handful of weak stars bloom. In this one, two canaries flit across a plum horizon, and in every painting, Christ is always pinned to the cross, dying. Here are the paintings with Aitchison's dogs gazing at the suffering Christ. They suffer so he doesn't die alone. Bedlington Terriers, like my sister's dog Olive, who was lost in a tunnel last spring. My sister lay alone all night, praying for her dog to be saved, and was saved by a man from the council, who, finding the manhole next morning, raised that filthy wretch into the light. The dog was shivering, ecstatic, black with sewage, forgiving us everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. That was amazing.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
everyone, please show your appreciation. That was a wonderful reading. Thank you. I think it's great to have things crashing into each other, Vanessa. You're in good company here.
Thank you.
So maybe that's what we try and do with poetry and the chemical sciences to varying degrees. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've got some lovely comments coming through. I'm sure if you're happy to hang around, we may come
Of course,
back.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Come back to some of your words there later.
I'd love that.
So lovely. Let's move on then to our first supporting reader, Miranda. Good to see you, Miranda.
Thank you, Stephen.
Okay, let me just introduce Miranda. So Miranda is an experienced writer and poet, researcher as well. Now she's currently working at the University of Cambridge as a research associate on the Morphs project, looking at open research practices in humanities. She has a PhD in creative writing from Bath Spa, in which she examined poetry, science, and the spiritual and how they combine and overlap. She's appeared, her words have appeared in countless publications, and she's published 2 collections. So Blue Dot About, a pamphlet with V Press, was published in 2020, and we actually published a collaborative sequence called Formulations, published by a small press a little over 3 years ago now. So over to you, Miranda. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen. I'm really pleased to be here, and Vanessa, your poems were absolutely gorgeous. It was so lovely to hear the wonder mixed with the wretchedness of our combined experience and all of those things that we share with the world. So thank you very much. So I'm just going to quickly explain the poem I'm going to read. It's the latest poem in the collaboration that Stephen and I are working on the chemistry of color, called Chromophoria, which hopefully will come to a conclusion soon, so we can get that published as well. So I'm looking at some chemical molecules for organic dyes in the yellow color, and just some of the structural things that we've brought into the poem are the chromophore, which is a conjugated system of single and double bonds that runs through the molecules, and what's called an oxychrome, which is a presence of sort of a set of other molecules that are, or other atoms that are a part of it, that whatever color it enhances them. So we used repetition to represent that in the final stanza. And in the first 9 stanzas, the structure and the rhyme scheme represent that conjugated system throughout. So the poem is called Be Aware Your Eyes Are Easy to Deceive. The secret of light is swallowed. Waves of violet energy leaping orbitals, running parallel. Light's secret is kept, reflecting back an ostensible opposite, because what comes to our eyes is mirage, miraculous. The bright sun, the lemon sky, poison frog and clouded sulfur butterfly, bright like banana toffee, like jeweled pineapple sweets. What was left out we take in and name. Our favorite color, the one we left in childhood, after clouded shadows tested our sight. Always be mindful. Hues may appear different. Your eyes get fatigued. Wavelengths won't always look the same. Our abilities fade as we age, and humans have terrible color memory. It is futile to gaze at 2 colors from across the age and to see if they are the same. We didn't know any better until we began to look closer. Fortunately, color vision is an acquired knowledge. So we practice evaluating afterglow for the ghosts of what remains. Unpick the golden chain of chromophores to find hidden indigo photon ghosts. A map of rivers dyed in verse, lost to weary eye. The overstimulated retina, saturated with lacriforms of radiant salt. Before next observing, rest the eye. Pause, knowing the hue a lie, or that truth in 2 parts, or many, is kaleidoscopic and composite. We see yellow in violet truth. How the sky is everything but blue. Waves of violet light are swallowed, the bright mirage, the poison butterfly. We take and name clouded wavelengths, futile gaze, afterglow of chromophores dyed radiant, lacriform ghosts, a violet eye. We knew better. Shiny crumbs sift kaleidoscopic, down into the finest tilth of matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to hear that read, actually. Really good. Yeah. Lovely. So let's introduce our next reader. I'm sure we'll come back to some of these poems later. And that's Lesley Curwen. So Lesley Curwen has been writing poetry most of her life, during her careers as a presenter, BBC reporter, journalist, and now she's got a track record of poems in many anthologies and magazines. She won the first Molecules Unlimited poetry competition. She was joint winner of her debut collection competition run by Hedgehog, and so that led to the release of Rescue Lines in 2024. She was joint winner of a chapbook competition with Dreich, and Sticky with Press came out as well from there. I recommend that. I'm just reading that at the moment. And in 2023, 9 Pens published Invisible Continents, which is another pamphlet of poems from her and her collaborators. So she lives in Plymouth by the sea, and like me, Claire cares very passionately about the environment and wildlife. So over to you, Lesley.
Stephen, thank you very much indeed. And as you mentioned, yeah, I live in Plymouth and I'm a sailor. And the poem that I'm going to read you is it's really based on what I often see when we moor in our little boat in the rivers in Devon and Cornwall, which is a canopy of trees moving constantly. But it always occurs to me that actually we don't see a lot of what is there. So this is about that. Canopy seen from a boat. Dip and flicker, leaf universe in sway. Our eyes cannot take in the granular flex of its gravity. Tier upon tier of silver ovals flash, stirring green scent down fat wavelengths of murmur. Imagine the infinitesimal beings camouflaged in its role, who swim this feral Mexican wave that travels long seconds like the stroke of hand on face, the touch, the reach of something spreading in unguessable circles about a fulcrum that is never quite still until it is. Heart asks I, is this no more than air in flux, or semaphore by things concealed in plain sight? Thank you.
Thank you, Lesley. Thank you very much indeed. And now we'd like to introduce Vicky Charlton. So Vicky is, I think, been associated with the group for a while now, and I think lives in Kelsall village and actually runs her own poetry group, which is exciting. I think you can read about that on Facebook. And she's, I think, been busy in her life as a dancer and also an English teacher. So she teaches English at various levels. So it's wonderful to have you here with us today.
Thanks, Stephen. So obviously I don't come from a science background, but I want to try and make my poetry accessible. And I think that it doesn't, regardless of the topic, if it's good poetry, it should be accessible to all readers. So I decided that under the banner of sight and vision, that I was going to research and write a poem about something I know nothing about. So hopefully, you'll see where I'm coming from. And I'm not actually 100% sure of the correct pronunciation as well, if it's Mira or Myra, because if it's American, it's Myra, I think, and if it's English, it's Mira. So you can quote me on that, please, Stephen, and correct me on that, if that's okay. So the poem's called Searching for Myra, or Mira. Outside the window, to the right of Jupiter, is brightness. That can't be right. On the other side of the world, in the heart of a constellation, wags a tail in the shadows. I'm still not sure. Out in space, with the night's concentration, is the ghost of a disappearance. Longingly, I'll wait. Keep my eyes to the skies, waiting for an ever-changing light source whose tail in ultralight will waltz with me to a regular beat. I wait for nearly a year, but then, right on time, regular as clockwork, she appears, a star, a wonderful, wonderful star.
Amazing, thank you. I really enjoyed that. I always call it Myra, but
Yeah,
but
is
it's,
it Myra? Because I would pronounce it Myra, but
yeah.
I heard when I was researching it, a lot of people referred to it as Mira, so I was a little bit unsure whether it was an Americanism or.
Yeah, I've heard both, but yeah, Myra's great. Yeah, lovely. By the way, you can always show the poems on the screen as well if you want to. I have enabled screen sharing. So if you want to do that later, feel free. Okay, thank you so much. Our next reader is Clare Collison. So she was one of the 3 winners of the inaugural Women's Poets Prize. She was placed 2nd in the Winchester Poetry Prize in 2020, the inaugural Resurgence Prize, and the Hippocrates Prize. Her first novel was the finalist in the Dundee Book Prize, and her debut pamphlet Placebo was published by Blueprint. She's worked as a creative copywriter and an arts editor for a disability arts magazine, and she's published many short stories, poems, non-fiction as well. She teaches creative writing in a wide variety of settings, and she also combines art and visual art and writing practices as well. And she was also the first Max literacy resident at Kettle's Yard in Cambridge. So over to you, Clare.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm going to read something that's quite fresh, but it's from a series that I've been working on for a while about the Palomares incident. I'm in Spain right now, and Palomares is about half an hour's drive away. And in 1966, when Vanessa was hanging out with her imaginary machine, at the height of the Cold War, there was a constant flight going between America and Russia, and they would refuel in the air, and it was an accident waiting to happen that did happen, which is called the Palomares incident, when the US B-52 dropped 4 H-bombs. And ever since then, it's kind of been covered up, and it's an area that produces a lot of tomatoes. And I've been exploring the emotional and ecological fallout. So this is the latest. Palomares actually means the place where pigeons used to be kept, their house, a dovecote kind of thing. So here we go. How to measure the long-term impact of the Palomares incident. It was an experiment no one had tried before. They had ascertained the higher than usual levels of radiation in snails by counting the whorl and speed and length of antlers. But had they extended this to the flora and fauna? Had they explored what happened to the fizzing broth at the local tapas bar, constant recipe of wild thyme and breadcrumbs when ingested? The snails didn't taste of much, it was their texture. They were the protein, infused in the shallow casserole and covered with cling film where droplets formed, then ladled into individual terracotta dishes and transferred to the blue microwave. Some tourists, particularly the naturists, were convinced the blue microwave was the real threat. They devised ways of neutralizing its energy, winding it in a duvet and stashing it in the wardrobe for the duration of their stay, collecting their own anecdotal evidence and challenging the readings of the local Geiger counter, watching the arrow vacillate in the wild landscape of the riverbed where the planes had fallen, dressed only in their peaked sun caps and sturdy trainers, their phones on lanyards, sweeping the ground with metal detectors in search of loose change, potential Roman artifacts, and metal trinkets from back when the area had precious metals and a smelter, and pigeons were prized for their shit as well as their meat. The snails, they said, had only themselves to blame. They could not signal too strongly this was a smokescreen. The results of their own readings reassured them the place was safe, still a viable spot to overwinter, to sit sweating onto their own little towel.
Wonderful. I really like that. That was really bringing science to life, actually. Yeah. I expect that spoke to Sarah Watkinson, but we'll see. Thank you very much. Okay, our next reader is Fiona Perry. Fiona was born and brought up in Northern Ireland, but has lived in many parts of the world. She was educated, I think, at Queen's University Belfast and Lancaster. And she's worked previously as an environmentalist. She works in learning support and lives near Oxford. So she's really widely published as well, as so many of our readers are. And she's also a prize winner. So her first collection of poetry was Alchemy, published by Turas Press in 2020, and that won the Poetry Books Silver Medal in 2021 and was shortlisted for the Rubery Prize. Her poem Fusion was long listed for the Fish Publishing Prize. An Animal Within an Animal received a special mention in the Welsh Poetry Prize. She also writes short fiction, and her piece Sea Change, which was a flash fiction piece, won first prize in a Bath competition, the Bath Flash Fiction Awards in 2020. And she's well published in many magazines such as The Alchemy, Spoon, Into the Void, and many, many others. So over to you, Fiona. Thank you.
Hello, Stephen. It's lovely to be here. This poem was inspired by the aura that comes with an ocular migraine, that really dramatic change in light and colour. So my migraines aren't painful, they're just really disorientating. And the last time I had one, I was at home, so I could just close my eyes and enjoy the light show. Ocular migraine. It's happening again, always in sunlight, always in denial of the prodrome, this bleeding out of colour. Every misstep, miscalculation, malfunction, in array, déshabillé. Nothing for it, except to lie supine, super, above. Watch the beveled edge tilt in unexpected directions, like a press gang sailor fumbling for coordinates on a storm-wrecked ship.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Fiona. And our final reader is Emma Storr. So I think Emma's always written poetry, and she's published The Year of Two Winters with Indigo Dreams, Off Cumdens, with Fair Acre Press in 2022, Heart Murmur by Calder Valley Poetry. And she's interested in many subjects, combining, the medical field with poetry. And it's lovely to have you with us. She was also runner-up in the second Molecules Unlimited poetry competition. And I should say she was joint winner of the Jeff Stevens Memorial Prize as well. So lovely to have you here, Emma. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Stephen, and thanks to everyone. What lovely, amazing poems we've heard. I thought it's such an interesting, varied collection. So I'm going to read you a poem called To Make an Eye. And that came about after doing some research on artificial eyes for a local radio programme back in 2020. And despite being a GP, I was actually extremely ignorant about how artificial eyes were made. I thought they were glass, and they used to be made of glass, but nowadays they're made of acrylic. And so if somebody's lost a whole eye, they have to have a prosthetic sort of marble thing put in, but then the actual eye is made of acrylic and hand painted in Blackpool. And I thought this was very interesting, and it can take weeks before the artificial eye is finished. It's like a little shell that fits over the prosthetic bit. And now newer techniques are being used with digital photography, which is also very interesting, but I'm sticking to the old-fashioned painting one in this. So this is to make an eye. Take a mould of her empty orbit's asymmetry, the interlocking socket bones that cup the air. Fashion an implant, porous and firm, stitch into place. Photograph the living eye, measure its dark pool. Search your palette for tones and hues that mimic her iris, the radial flares of blue and brown, the crimson threads of her milky sclera. Dip the sable tip with care to mix each shade. Paint the acrylic shell that fits under her lids, so when she blinks, looks up and down, her blind imposter fills and fools us all. Sorry, got a frog.
Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you. It's fascinating the way those eyes are made. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So I'm just going to open the floor to anyone really to see whether you've got anything else you want to say about what you've heard, and maybe we can pull these the elements within the theme together somehow. I mean, I was interested in the fact that you have the very obviously seen colours with yeah, the yellow from Miranda, the blue from Clare, and then you have the unseen, perhaps touched on by Vanessa, with Faith, with her last poem. That was something that struck me, that sometimes we think about sight, don't we? But we need to think about what we can't see as well. Any other thoughts? Any other observations? Or
I thought it was quite interesting to just hear all the different angles that people took when thinking about sight and the way that we perceive, and how there's the sort of physical aspect of what we see, but then the, you know, the mental aspect of how we perceive the things that we see, and how the things we don't see impact us in the way that we perceive the things that we do see. So I thought that was really quite interesting, and I loved every poem that everybody read. It was really lovely to hear the different takes on that, and I think the variety was just really interesting. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting thing that had arisen.
thank you. Yeah, it's curious that when you look at an object, the color that you actually experience is actually reflected light, isn't it? Rather than what's absorbed. So that's an interesting scientific point as well. Thank you, Miranda. Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting to hear the kind of analysis of colour, poetic analysis of colour in Miranda's poem and your poem, because I never really thought about yellow in quite such a way before, and I wonder, do you in other poems, do you go into different colours?
Yeah, so with the project that Stephen and I are working on, we've got everything with the last sort of sixth color we're looking at is sort of like the purple indigo range. But we've looked at red and green and orange and blue. I think we started with blue. And so it's been a quite fascinating process really to, you know, dig deeply into the structure of the molecules that make those colors that we see, but also, you know, exploring associations with the colors. So the structure creates the form, but then the poem itself will explore the color and the associations with that. So yeah, it's been quite interesting and a lot of fun. And I think that the whole thing that Stephen mentioned about, you know, the things that we look at seeing those colors is actually not what the color is of the object, but what's rejected from it almost. It was what's reflected off of it. And another thing that I found quite interesting was that this chain that was part of the molecule, depending on how long that conjugated chain is, that will mean the color you see. And also the way these electrons might jump orbitals, the electron volt energy that's required will also dictate the color you see. So, I mean, I'm not a scientist at all. I just am really fascinated by it. And so I am coming to all of these understandings that I never would have otherwise about color. It's very fun. Yeah, sorry for the long-winded answer.
I don't know. I think you sounded like a scientist there.
Oh, good. maybe I'm getting there.
When I was thinking about what to read, I was thinking a lot about that expression. I saw it with my own eyes, and how that means it's the absolute, if someone says that, it means it's the absolute truth, therefore. And how much, actually, Zoom's quite an interesting example of how it's quite a daunting thing to read on Zoom still, because you can't really sort of engage with people properly. Only one person can speak at once, and all you have is faces, and you don't know them, and you want to feel sort of like safe and like you're getting kind of warmth from them, but you can't always. And so, I saw it with my own eyes, and therefore it must be true. It's kind of completely subjective kind of idea, isn't it? A couple of years ago, my mum, she was waiting to have a cataract operation, and both of her eyes, and she said to me, "Oh, one day, I've never seen you wearing brown before." And I said, "Oh, I'm not wearing brown." She was talking about my trousers. She said, "Oh, I said, "They're green." And she said, "No, they're not, they're brown." And I said, "No, Mum, you're waiting for an operation, aren't you? And you can't see properly. You're seeing things as brown." She went, "No, they are brown." And it's just of all things that we feel like we completely can rely on, our eyes, and our what we see is kind of feels like a thing that no one else can deny. Even when you know that there's something that needs to happen to your eyes, you still believe that your truth is the truth if you can see it. I suppose it's what makes us feel safe in the world, that's the thing that we most rely on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. How did you feel, Vicky, about, your poem went down really well,
I really, actually, to be honest, I really enjoyed researching it. It's such a massive topic anyway. But I was really interested in the whole idea of just trying to take myself out of my comfort zone, really. I think it's just so easy to walk about, write about menopause and oncoming age and wrinkles. And it's just, actually, when you give yourself a little bit of a, and just say, right, this is it. You've got to research this, and you've got to take, I just didn't want it to sound like a GCSE poem, if you know what I mean. I didn't want it to sort of come across like that, but I found it very interesting when I was researching the whole topic, and the fact that perception is why should we understand it? Why are we, I mean, I'm sure there's people you work with, Stephen, that still don't know the answer to everything. Do you know what I mean? And I think that that's okay as well. So when you look at something and you think it's that thing, and then of course with Mira, she disappears. And, for a long time, the very old scientists, when they were researching her, they'd sort of try to put in the constellation, and then she disappeared again. And so they were sort of a little bit, does she exist? Doesn't she exist? And actually, sort of, if you take the banner of science, I think that's kind of okay to be a bit like that, to say, actually, I don't know if I'm seeing this properly. I don't know if I'm viewing this right.
Oh, totally. I think scientists don't know much at all, really. I think I think theories always come and go, and they always evolve. And the moment you think you've got everything sussed, you know, I think you failed really.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's always stuff to learn.
Mm.
Yeah. And there's just a lot of talk about this grand unifying theory of physics. I wouldn't be surprised if we never get there, you know.
Mm.
I think there's a missing ingredient that we'll probably not be able to comprehend. Anyway, that's going off on a slight tangent. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Actually, that's interesting. What Sarah's just put. Maybe there are no final answers, only new questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, look, I won't keep you. That was just a fantastic evening. Really enjoyed that. Thank you all for your poems. And I'll be in touch when the link becomes available. Please share it around, and happy writing.
Thank you so much.
Thanks all. Lovely poems. Thank you.
Yeah, so let's give yourself a round of applause. I think that was amazing. Thank you.
Thanks for organising it, Stephen.
Yes,
No
thank
problem.
you, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen.
Take care all.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.